We continue the dance with the media about Pope Francis's health while he is in the hospital. I'm going to just show you how nutty this is. Let's go to Reuters. I saw this morning just before going live, and I saw it on my phone. Their headline, or on X, is Pope Francis in critical condition had quiet night in hospital, Vatican says. And when I saw this is an awful picture they used. I say it's an awful picture because I saw it on mobile. Larger, if you're seeing this on television or on a PC or laptop, something bigger, you can see that it's possibly a candle or a cup or something of a photograph of Pope Francis with raindrops going down his face. On my mobile device, it looked like a wax sculpture that had started melting, meaning it looked like his face was, well, melting. It wasn't exactly the most flattering picture. And I sometimes wonder if the people at Reuters, who famously took USAID money from the US government, by the way, that's in the federal records. If they did, I sometimes wonder if they did that on purpose. Let's go to updates from sources I think are more credible. First, we go to Catholic Sat, who said the latest on Pope Francis from the Vatican. This is this morning. The Pope's condition remains critical but stable. Actually, this is from yesterday. Critical but stable. There have been no acute episodes of respiratory distress. The hemodynamic parameters continue to be stable. In the evening, he underwent a CAT scan to monitor the pneumonia. The prognosis remains guarded. He has resumed work activity. Okay, so I'm going to show you. He remains critical. He is in critical condition but is doing work. What does that mean? I'm going to show you what that means here in a minute. But we go to to Catholic Sat, who's been basically staying up, seeming like just doing 24/7 coverage on this. The same refrain as we get every single morning. The latest on Pope Francis from the Vatican. This was published an hour ago. The Pope had a peaceful night and is resting. That's a little bit different, actually. They usually say he had a peaceful night and is now doing work or reading the newspapers or whatever. He is resting. Catholic News Service on X. Evening bulletin. Pope Francis's condition remains critical but stable. He had a follow-up CAT scan to monitor his pneumonia. Again, prognosis guarded. And I'm going to tell you, some of us are getting kind of tired of these guarded prognoses. But this comes from Novus Ordo Watch, and they asked the very obvious question. Latest Vatican update on Pope Francis' health issued minutes ago. This would have been noon or so yesterday. How does Francis resume work activities while in critical condition? Any doctors, nurses out there have an answer. Now, this is just a screenshot from the actual information for journalists section from the Vatican website. And it is a very good question. If normal people were in the hospital in critical condition, you would not be doing work, probably. So how is he doing? And what is he doing? Well, I did a little digging, and I found what he's doing. So let's go to cath.net. And I think this gives you a hint of where things are going. Headline from cath.net, which is a German-Austrian moderate version of LifeSite. Pope Francis summons Cardinal to consistory. Date not yet known. Consistory, not a conclave, a consistory. This has to do with canonizations he's been working on. This has to do with people he's elevating up in the process of being canonized. But consistories are also where you make new cardinals. Now, I sincerely doubt he's going to try to do a consistory to make new cardinals on extremely short notice. And this is where that 72-hour number comes in. I had been told by a number of people after my live stream yesterday that who are professionals in the medical field, who will say that a 72 hours to live kind of thing is what the doctors will tell you when they don't think you have very long, but they don't want to give too good amount of time because as common sense dictates, if say a doctor told you had a month left and then you didn't last that month, the family's going to be pretty upset by that, right? So they give you a 72 hours for generally as a short notice thing, which I kind of suspect is also when they tell somebody you got 6 months left, that you have a moderate length of time left. We don't know how much longer you have. So they give you these kind of round numbers. But I don't think Francis is going to have enough time to summon a bunch of cardinals, would-be cardinals, to Rome to make them cardinals from a gurney, basically, in St. Peter's or in a hospital. So I don't think that's the case here. On the surface, they're reporting this having to do with canonization. So here we go from this article, which is very short. Pope Francis could soon be discussing things with his cardinals. On Monday, the Pope decided to convene a consistory to discuss the next canonizations the Vatican announced on Tuesday. A date for this meeting of cardinals chaired by the Pope has not yet been published. The head of the Catholic Church has been treated for complex infections in Rome's Gemelli Clinic for 12 days. Consistory serves to discuss specific matters or to carry out certain particularly solemn acts, such as canonizations. Cardinals who live in Rome mainly come together for this purpose. Also, it's about making cardinals. They never really talk about that. And then it goes into who he made as for canonizations. And longtime viewers know I don't really pay that much attention to new canonizations because the process got completely changed. But that's he's starting to meet with cardinals, and one of the things he's done with them is this. Info Vaticana with this headline, and my apologies. Info Vaticana has some of the best news reporting. They also are pop-up city. YouTube does not permit us to use the things that prevent that from happening. So bear with me here. But the headline: cascade of episcopal appointments in Brazil. Pope Francis reorganizes several dioceses. This is what he's doing from the hospital. And I am not one who believes that he's passed away already and that there's just doing things behind the scenes, that these are cardinals doing things, because if they believe a conclave is coming and they want to maintain their power, the very last thing they're going to do is do something that, if it got out, would cause all of the cardinals who are kind of going to be the swing votes in this kind of a process to turn against them. That would, because doing something like that would blow up right in their face. But Francis is now making a whole bunch of episcopal appointments, that meaning new bishops or promoting bishops in Brazil, several key dioceses. This is reported this morning in Info Vaticana. The Vatican announced yesterday numerous episcopal appointments to the church in Brazil, between resignations and appointments. Resignations happening when they hit the 75th birthday, per canon law. Pope Francis has appointed new bishops and auxiliaries for various ecclesiastical jurisdictions. That's one thing he's doing. Let's go to the next one. You see, remember when I told you he summoned cardinals? This is what you should keep an eye on. This is the sign, one of the signs I hinted at, and others have hinted at, saying, if you want to know what the truth is of Francis's health, watch to see who he has meet with him in the hospital. Info Vaticana. Parolin and Peña Parra visit the Pope in the hospital. Cardinal Pietro Parolin is the Cardinal Secretary of State, and we're going to get to that office here in just a moment. Parolin's name always comes up high on the list of papabile cardinals, and not in a kind of way that you would want to see become Pope. He would be considered something possibly worse than Francis, because it's pretty obvious at this point that Francis does not like, say, traditionalists. That he doesn't like the traditional mass or any of those things. But he also seems rather ambivalent. Look at his history of being weirdly okay with the SSPX. Just doesn't seem to care that much himself about things. He's more about unity. Parolin was one of the voices in Rome pushing for the total elimination of the traditional Latin Mass and the traditional forms of the sacraments. He would be not somebody you would want to see on the throne of Peter. He's also the Cardinal Secretary of State, which sometimes gets called Vice Pope. It's like the second in command. He's the one in charge of the diplomats. He's got a lot of duties in the conclave, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Pope Francis received Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Parolin. Pietro means Peter, by the way. For those of you who really like the St. Malachi prophecy, you'd really love him to be Pope. And the Secretary of State's substitute, Venezuelan Edgar Peña Parra, in his room at the Gemelli Hospital. This news is highly significant because it means that the Pope has the strength to continue working and dealing with current issues from the hospital. The Holy See press office has confirmed that the Pope took advantage of the brief meeting with Parolin and Peña Parra to sign some decrees related to naming of new saints. Again, this goes to that consistory that he's talking about. Meanwhile, the Bishop of Rome's progress seems to be improving, although a certain slowness and caution on part of the doctors who are treating him. It's Info Vaticana giving you, kind of repeating the official line. I'm asking you to read between the lines here when you see these things. Because at the end of the day, meeting with these figures could also mean something else. Now, what wasn't said there in that article was what a Cardinal Secretary of State does during a conclave. They have very specific things they do. They become almost a key figure right up there with the Camerlengo. So I'm going to just do a quick summary of what a Cardinal Secretary of State does. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that a coming conclave came at the meeting with the Cardinal Secretary of State and the Assistant Cardinal Secretary of State. This isn't just about canonizations. This is possibly Francis doing his contingency plan with Cardinal Pietro Parolin. See, during a conclave, the Cardinal Secretary of State plays a significant role as the primary organizer and facilitator of the election process for the Roman Pontiff, overseeing the logistical aspects of the conclave while not directly participating in the voting as a cardinal elector, essentially acting as the key administrative leader during the papal election process. He is not barred from being made pope. He could be out there doing whatever campaigning is permitted in the conclave process within the rules, but he's facilitating the process. A couple key points for what he does. He provides leadership and organization. They maintain the overall organization of the conclave, ensuring smooth operations and adherence to established procedures. He provides diplomatic and political oversight. They provide insight on potential candidates, international standing, political implications, and all the rest. Interesting, too, for somebody who is as papabile as Cardinal Parolin is said to be. They're also a facilitator of communications. They act as a conduit between the conclave proceedings and the outside world, managing communication with the media and other Vatican officials. And most interestingly, they don't vote in the conclave process themselves. Which would be interesting here if Cardinal Pietro Parolin, upon the passing of Pope Francis, announced that he was stepping down from the position of Cardinal Secretary of State so that he could participate, and his assistant became the acting Cardinal Secretary of State. Again, this is a political process, but there's more to it than just being a political process, because Cardinal Mueller has spoken up again. In fact, he's spoken up a lot in the last few days. I've got a video coming. Patrons have access to it already, but he's spoken up elsewhere in things. But this was interesting. Info Vaticana again, headline: Cardinal Mueller encouraged us to pray that the Lord gives his church good shepherds according to the heart of Jesus. That's just, I think, the best advice a cardinal could give. The Rosary, by the way, is being prayed for Pope Francis, and we'll talk about that in a second, because it is, of course, praying the Rosary as a group for someone is, of course, a spiritual act, an act of charity, an act of mercy, and all the rest of it. It's what you should be doing as a Catholic, is praying in this time. There's a political dimension to that. Let's go to a non-political dimension. There was an interview done, and here's what Cardinal Mueller had to say. He's asked about the Rosary that was prayed, led by Cardinal Pietro Parolin a couple of nights ago. And he says, it was very worthy and pious. Praying the Rosary introduces us to mysteries of the life of Jesus, our Savior, the only mediator between God and humanity. For us Christians, illness and death are not the ultimate catastrophe, as they are for nihilists and skeptics, materialists and atheists who have no hope. In reality, man's earthly life, with its endless longing for freedom and love, does not end in total frustration, because existence has an absolute meaning, and the Spirit demands the highest knowledge, which is revealed to us through faith in the Word of God made man. Fallible human reason, logos, is embraced by divine reason, always infallible, and is rewarded with the presence of God and his Son, Jesus Christ, from whose fullness we have all received grace in the place of grace. He's asked if he's worried about the Pope, and he says, as a human being and a non-medical professional, I have no influence on his age and state of health. 70 is the sum of our years, or 80, says the Psalms, experience tells us. When a child or young person falls ill, we rightly think more about physical recovery than when an elderly person is ill. But we always pray together for temporal well-being and eternal salvation, entrusting the whole person to God. But the supernatural perspective is broad. It is appointed for man to die once, and after this comes judgment. This is the focus of our prayer for an elderly person, in which the saints in heaven and the faithful of the church, who are still pilgrims on earth, unite themselves with Christ, their head, who stands before God as our advocate with our Father. He says, do you think that our current task as cardinals is to put aside our political ecclesiastical disputes and pray shoulder to shoulder for our Holy Father? And this is something where a lot of people are going to be upset, because you may have seen some pretty sharp takes about Pope Francis since he's been in the hospital. It says, this hour is not about power games, self-recommendations, and races of candidates, but about reflecting on the essence of the ministry of Peter that Christ gave to his church. The unity of the church resides in revealed truth and must not be damaged in a political, ideological trench war. And then he goes on. He says, let us not cross our fingers for one of our favorite candidates as in competition for an ephemeral prize, and let us not make personnel politics based on the horoscope of journalists and politicians completely alien to the church who see in the Vatican only a power factor on the world political stage. Instead, let us pray that the Lord may give his church good shepherds according to the heart of Jesus. And he goes on. He's also asked if he knows of any cardinals who are, changing their plans and some planning to travel to Rome. And he says he hasn't really heard much about that. But it's clear he's not thinking about this politically, at least publicly. Meanwhile, as I just said, the Rosary continues to be offered in St. Peter's for Francis's health. And for the second night in a row, we have what looks like this Rosary meeting being subtly used as a showcase of potential Francis's successors that Francis personally approves of. And I'm telling you this immediately after what Cardinal Mueller said, because I can't help but notice that not last night, but the night before, it was Cardinal Pietro Parolin, which may have been a coincidence just because of his role as diplomat to the world, essentially on behalf of the Vatican, and all the rest of his things that I just told you about. But then, last night, the Rosary in Vatican City was led by none other than another Bergoglian type Francis II possibility, Cardinal Tagle, who led the Rosary Tuesday in St. Peter's Square. Yeah, Cardinal Tagle. He is no one's favorite to be a sharp pope. By the way, he would be kind of There's video footage out there. I'm doing what you could say is his "Hello, fellow kids, hello, young people" moment, where there are people at World Youth Day and he's literally rapping with them. And I'm not even being facetious. He's literally on camera rapping with them, and it looks like he's having a good time. It's very cringe-inducing. He's actually considered papabile. For a couple of years, he wasn't because he had some mismanagement of some Vatican administrative office. But in the last year or so, he's been seen closely in the company of Pope Francis again. But he is considered papabile, and he was the one leading the Rosary last night. And none of this has stopped people from speculating on who the next pope is going to be. I'm going to just go over this article from Info Vaticana here that gives you, I think, the most likely people. Not that necessarily, I think we're headed towards a conclave soon, but I don't know how long because no one knows except God. And again, you have 72 hours left thing is a kind of a vague prognosis. And even then, we haven't had that confirmed. But did you notice that they went from slightly improving to stable and stationary? That's not good. If he was continuing to improve slightly every day and did not have another sharp downturn, then you might make the argument that he is not going to be in the hospital for very long. But here's a piece done by Info Vaticana. Again, this is not by any super radical. He says the author says they wanted to outline 3 lists. The trio of those whom I would modestly like to see in the See of Peter, those who have real possibilities beyond my tastes, meaning people he would not like to see, and those whose elections would make my blood run cold. And above all, there's one name that deserves special mention. So let's go over this author's personal picks. I think this is a pretty on-the-nose list here. Thing 3 he would choose would be Cardinal. Apologies for the pronunciation. I can never pronounce his name right. Eijk, E-I-J-K, from the Netherlands. He's a cardinal of iron in a country that has become one of the cemeteries of faith in Europe. A doctor and theologian, he has openly denounced the moral crisis of the West and the doctrinal laxity of the Church. He would be a pope willing to restore clarity in teaching and to give back the sense of the sacred. This is what you would call a pretty hardline, traditionally minded pope. I don't know where he is on liturgy and a lot of the finer details that we tend to care about. Another one is Cardinal Peter Erdo, another pope named Peter, whose name is Peter for all those who, for some reason, really like the St. Malachi prophecy. Don't read too much into that. He's a primate of Hungary, a leading intellectual, and experienced in government. He would bring order and strategy to a time of confusion. And then somebody that one of my viewers brought to my attention, Cardinal Ranjith from Sri Lanka. He's the former secretary of this Congregation for Divine Worship, staunch defender of the traditional liturgy, and critic of post-conciliar abuses. Benedict XVI held him in high esteem and entrusted him with various key tasks. One thing that the viewer told me that I found fascinating about Cardinal Ranjith is that he has said apparently on the record that if he had his way, he would have the SSPX priests teaching theology in the seminaries. Which immediately, if that's actually something, if I could confirm that he said that, immediately he'd become my first choice. I'm very pro SSPX. I'm also very pro FSSP and every other traditional priestly fraternity. But to have them, whose theology is unimpeachable, teaching theology in the seminaries, 100% on board. Here's the other flip side of those coins, though. First name, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the eternal candidate, he gets called. He's the architect of Francis's diplomatic policy, but his role in the disastrous agreement with China should be enough to disqualify him. He has no pastoral charisma or known experience. I don't care about the experience thing for being pontiff. Peter had no experience either, okay? But if he becomes pope, we will actually find out what many of the cardinals actually think or know about that deal and how important it actually is to the financial continuing operations of Rome. My suspicion is that deal with China is so important that won't disqualify him. Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, consider him a more charismatic version of Francis, who not the kind of person who's going to give you a lot of rigid clericalist and detrist talk. He's not going to be slinging insults, but he will keep that program going. He's a president of the Italian Episcopal Conference, mediator in international conflicts, and confidant of the current pope. He has a huge, huge influence around the world. He has, he is seen as Francis II with the same emphasis on social and ecumenical issues, but with greater management capacity, meaning he'd be a more effective Francis at controlling the Roman Curia. Tagle. I laugh every time I think of Cardinal Tagle as Pope because it would be just a Titanic moment. Like literally the ship is at the iceberg kind of thing. I don't mean the bark of Peter is going down, but I mean the modernists will have completely lost the plot if they put him on the throne of Peter. But he's charismatic, approachable, and labeled as Papabile for years. He's a member of the School of Bologna, which, if you know anything about that, is a giant red flag. His appointment as prefect for the Congregation of the Evangelization of Peoples was interpreted as a nod to his candidacy. He is the face of Asian Catholicism, and for many, the natural continuation of the current pontificate. Now, this is somebody who is, again, this is the flip side. These are the people who are not his preferences, his author's preferences. And he named all these ultra-conservatives. And then you're going to be surprised to join the list of less than ideal is Cardinal Pizzaballa, the Patriarch of Jerusalem. And other names that are being mentioned as a consensus. The figure has been revalued in recent months for his role in the Holy Land conflict. He even offers himself to the really bad people there in exchange for the other side's prisoners. He's viewed favorably both conservatives and progressives as a papal candidate who's capable of reuniting a divided church. That is to me a red flag. Post-conciliar conservatives and progressives like him. Be wary. That means there's something. If the progressives like him, there's something there with his theology. People should dig more deeply. And I think the one that has almost no chance of happening and would be really bad if it did, Cardinal Dolan. The Archbishop of New York could benefit from Trump's rise in the United States. To put it bluntly, if you see Dolan, it's because the migration issue. I have predicted since the Catholic Charity story happened, that story, if it is not resolved soon, is going to loom large at the next conclave. And here are the three that scares him the most with that thought in mind: Cardinal Cupich and Cardinal McElroy. Either of them. Cupich is 75. Cardinal Robert McElroy is a few years younger than that. They represent the same thing, the most progressive wing of the American episcopate. Cupich, close to Francis's line, has been a promoter of the inclusive church. McElroy, even more radical than Blaise Cupich, has advocated for more flexible morality, has been a defender of the access to communion for pro-Moloch politicians. I don't think you're going to get American Pope. I would discount Dolan, Cupich, or McElroy. But if you see either of them come on the step on the loggia, you're going to see Sedevacantism explode because it would be so obvious at that point. Jean-Claude Hollerich, a name that I have been floating as a surprise candidate. And I say surprise candidate, not to just be contrarian, but because the old adage of he who walks into a conclave as Pope walks out a cardinal has been true for virtually every conclave for the last 100 years, except with 2005's Benedict XVI. And even then, Ratzinger barely won that one. according to all the reports from inside. We nearly got Bergoglio in 2005. Hollerich is one of the heads of a synod on synodality. For the last 4 years, he has been in the eye of the cardinals. They have gotten to know him. Yeah, he's progressive, extremely. He's the one leading synodality. And I will tell you right now, one of the reasons that a lot of moderate cardinals like synodality is because it emphasizes decentralization. It gives them more of a voice, the ones who are on the peripheries. Do not underestimate Jean-Claude Hollerich. The rapporteur of the Synod on Synodality, openly in favor of review of the Church's morality of the flesh. His election will mark a change of direction and doctrine, that's putting it mildly, with unforeseeable consequences. And then Michael Czerny of Canada, prefect for the dicastery of promoting integral human development. Laudato Si stuff. Of course, a special mention goes to Cardinal Robert Sarah. He's 79 years old, which means that his pontificate would be short, which would be attractive to many people, and he would be a unifying force because he would be unlikely to challenge anything going on. He would probably correct Laudato Si a little bit, correct Amoris Laetitia a little bit, correct Fiducia Supplicans a little bit, probably restore the traditional access to the traditional mass to some degree, more than we have now. But I couldn't see Cardinal Sarah also cleaning house in the Roman Curia, which is what it probably desperately needs. Whoever becomes the next pope, your litmus test is going to be a figure who's not considered papabile at all, but has one of the most important jobs in Rome, and that is Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez. Your litmus test regarding Fernandez is how long until Fernandez is fired. And it could be that a new pope comes in and just decides to use a bunch of political capital and gets rid of the guy within a week. That would be ideal. It would also be understandable if he decided to wait some time, wait a year or something to get rid of him. But getting rid of Cardinal Fernandez has to happen. Also getting rid of the likes of Hollerich and them, sending them back to their countries to go be the ordinaries of their dioceses again, or new dioceses. That has to happen, whoever that new pope is. But remember, as I started with, Francis seems to be in halfway decent health, according to the official reports, which we know are nonsense. He has gone from critical but improving to critical but stable. What does that even mean? We don't know. And we don't know what critical condition even means anymore when he is meeting with cardinals and signing off on appointments for practically remaking the entire episcopate in Brazil. That's the stuff he's been doing. So if you were to just take his workload as your evidence for what he really is doing, then he seems to be in better condition than they're reporting. On the other hand, it could be that he is trying to get as much done as possible with a short amount of time left. If that's the case, start watching for a motu proprio or two to be released, because those are the documents that change canon law, or at least functionally change canon law. A motu proprio is what he would issue if he wanted to, change the rules of the conclave. We have been hearing for a year or two that Francis had a document in the works that was going to change the conclaves in one specific way. The conclave being how we get a Roman pontiff. And the key way they talked about changing it is this: banning cardinals who have been essentially on the receiving end of Francis's wrath from participating in the conclave. If a cardinal has gone after the Pope, submitted dubias and said negative things about the Pope and been chastised for it, not permitted in the conclave. That's been the floating rumor for like the last year. They would find, of course, a way that makes it sound legal and just and all the rest, but that would be the point. And that would be a really ugly look. You've all seen that picture on Facebook floating around and on X floating around. I showed it yesterday on my live stream of Cardinal Burke, dressed very low key, praying the rosary when at the event led by Cardinal Pietro Parolin. Probably later today, another picture of him will show up. We'll start arriving at the one led by Cardinal Tagle last night, where he was praying for Pope Francis and doing so in a way that did not bring attention to him. Remember, people like to go after Cardinal Burke for really dressing in the more kind of what some would call flamboyant clerical attire for a cardinal from before Vatican II. People like to make fun of him for that. Well, here he was wearing a trench coat and like a fedora is what it looked like. And he was trying to be low key while praying the rosary for the man who literally canceled him, publicly made fun of him while he was in the hospital himself with health problems. And yet he was being the actual model of Christian charity and trying not to bring attention to himself. bear all this in mind. We are unfortunately, I don't like having discussed this stuff in terms of politics, but that's what it's all become. It's all political. And this is why I don't discount necessarily the Cardinal Syrah talk. I don't think he'll be Pope, but I could, if he emerged on the loggia, putting a 79-year-old man who turns 80 this summer. He will be 80 years old this summer, which means after this summer, whenever his birthday is this summer, he will not be able to participate in the conclave as anything other than an advisor. That's it. He won't be able to vote. They could still make him Pope, but the chances of an 80-year-old getting elected Pope are pretty slim. Pat Moynihan says, another update sitting in armchair cats results this evening. What's going on? That's the thing. This is why everybody's asking. Like, this is why I showed you that Novus Ordo Watch tweet at the beginning. People were like, he's in critical condition, but he's also meeting with cardinals and naming saints. Like, what are you doing? Like, what does it mean to be in critical condition if you're able to do work? Traditional Catholic says, now that's virtuous. The Pope who canceled him and he's leading the Rosary for him. Yes, and I have never hidden that I disagree with Cardinal Burke on some very serious things about how to resist what's going on, the SSPX and the rest. But that was the most remarkable public act of actual virtue that I have seen from anybody in this whole process. I wish more cardinals were acting the way Cardinal Burke is in this. Richard I says, here in Italy, the media is bombarding the public with mixed messages. On one hand, all is well and Francis will recover soon. On the other, they started reminding their readers how the conclave works. You have to learn to read between the lines of things. That almost looks like they're hedging their bets. Like, I would not be surprised if he recovered, but recovered very slowly. I would also not be surprised if on Ash Wednesday, I'm doing an afternoon live stream to report to you that they're now planning a funeral. I'm not saying that to be gleeful. I'm not saying that to be crude or crass. It's just that their messaging on this is so all over the board. It's obscene. David Keller says it's reporting akin to what was done in the Soviet Union when a president was ill or had passed. Right. Or it reminds people of what happened with John Paul II. He's stable. Everything is he's slightly improving until he was obviously not, and then they had the charade and went away. Evelyn says, I don't see Cardinal Dolan as Pope. Neither do I. But if he emerges Pope, it'd be clearly a political thing. Chester says, Cardinal Pieter Erdo, another Peter, and he's a conservative pro-family Hungarian cardinal who sat in quietly through the synod on synodality. It all burned down under a conservative. Right. I mean, that's the other thing. Most of your conservative cardinals, if they participated in the synod as members, they went along with it for the most part. Cardinal Mueller's name is not high on the list of papacy types, but he was more openly against what was going on, which might be why he's not papacy. He went on with Raymond Arroyo and told everybody how bad this stuff was. He wrote public letters warning the faithful about the synod on synodality. Damon Keller says, the problem is that we need a complete reversal post-Vatican II, and there are no bishops who will resist the reform. The only bishop that I've seen who is willing to admit that the documents of Vatican II are themselves the problem, not just their interpretation, not just their implementation, but the actual documents contain doctrinal ambiguity or worse, is Bishop Athanasius Schneider, who is an assistant bishop. He's not a cardinal. He's not an archbishop. He's not even a regular bishop. He is an assistant bishop, the lowest level of bishop you can be, short of being made an honorific bishop upon your retirement. And so the chances of him becoming Pope are next to zero. He is not in the conversation, and he's the only one who would do it. Pizzaballa is not anti-Latin Mass, for your information. He won't be elected, probably. Yeah, I don't see someone from the Holy Land who is as vocal about the sides going on there being elected, just for political reasons. Plus, he's 59 years old, and knowledgeable observers question whether they would want to put a pope in who could be there for 30 years. That's what you're looking at. With Pizzaballa, you would be looking at possibly the last pontiff elected in most of our lifetimes, including mine. I'm 45. There's a good chance that I won't see 75 just because I'm an American. Okay, so he might be the last pope of my lifetime if he were elected. Traditionalist Catholics says, if I had my druthers return to pre-55 liturgy and ignore the post-51 reforms. Yeah, well, that's probably not going to happen. Not going to happen. Will we get the truth before he's passed away or infighting first? If you mean the truth about his condition, I think we'll get the condition, truth about his condition, probably hours before. Want to brace people for what's happened. But that's what I think is going on, and I think really you're seeing Francis ramping up his work, possibly because he believes he has limited time. Watch for a motu proprio in the coming days, if that's the case. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments. Casper with the super chat, it is appreciated. He says, if only Cardinal George Pell was still with us. I say Pell is an interesting story. I mentioned yesterday all his financial things, how he was the list of the Cardinals in the last 20 years who went deep into Vatican finances, and how they all had one weird thing in common, is that they all got canceled. Vigano first. Archbishop Vigano was the one finding millions upon millions of dollars hidden away in various Vatican accounts that should not have existed, and then was moved to the United States as papal nuncio for his own protection, the way he describes it. That happened under Benedict. The next cardinal or the next figure to do that was Cardinal George Pell, who started finding millions upon millions of dollars in places it should not be. And then you know what happened to him. And following that was Cardinal Becciu, who, from what it looks like, I could be wrong, and forgive me if I am wrong about this, but it looks like he kind of decided to play along with the people who were squirreling away those millions upon millions of dollars that should not have been. And he became the fall guy when it became public. But there's a pattern there that they all got canceled. Weird how that works out. Cardinal Pell getting the ultimate cancellation, if you know anything about the reports about what happened to him, how he was found, how he passed away from a fairly routine surgery, and the condition he was in afterwards. Odd. But that's enough of that. Quentin says, nothing wrong with reformers of 500 years ago. Yeah, that's not true. There were heretics and schismatics, and they led souls to eternal perdition. We are not Protestant fans here. Thank you very much, Quentin. All right, folks. I will tell you that I do believe that we're going to start. I think we're going to get a resolution to this Francis in the hospital story within the next several days. I think that it's going to take whatever turn it's going to take. We are going to see that in the next several days. The language that they are using to describe Francis is just, again, from critical but improving to critical but stable or stationary, as the language they're using is, can't be ignored anymore. I think that's the beginning of them hinting. So let's see what happens. And remember my hypothesis. 2 nights ago it was Cardinal Pietro Parolin leading that rosary publicly. The day after, last night, was Cardinal Tagle. Let's see who the next one is tonight, leading that in Rome. Those public rosaries are wonderful things. But it does look like you're starting to see kind of the rogues gallery of the papabile for Francis being the ones leading it. So we'll see what happens with that tonight. So pay attention to that story. See who that's leading that. And tomorrow morning, God willing, I will report on that rosary thing to see if I was right. Just it's a hunch. Anyway, folks, thanks very much for tuning in today and banning someone who is predicting that Cardinal Pell is suffering under the fires of perdition for whatever reason. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe. If you haven't, it does help. Sharing this on social media helps too. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.